So in this video, students, we're going to talk a little bit more about the defining table concepts, and we're going to do that in the context of JavaScript. And as we go along, hopefully it'll embed some of the concepts of JavaScript more clearly in your minds while we try to reinforce this concept of the input, the processing, and the output. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Notice here that I've got 3 comments already in place. The reason I'm doing that is for the first little while we're going to be really careful about separating our input and our processing and our output as much as we can so that it's really clear to us when we're doing one versus the other. As we move along through the semester, it won't be as necessary. In fact, as we get more efficient with our code, it'll be very hard to separate them out because sometimes you'll be doing all 3 in the same line of code. But for now, it should be pretty simple to keep them separated until these concepts are a little more solid in our minds. So we're going to start with some input, and we're going to with the input we're going to learn about and see something called the JavaScript prompt. Right here, you'll see the prompt, and that basically is similar to the alert box that we talked about, we saw in a previous video, but it also has an input box and a button that you can push to basically put in some information and then hit enter. And we're going to take the information from that input box and save it into a variable. Now, the book talks briefly about variables this week, basically just that there is a keyword called var, which we use to declare a variable, and we do that by saying var, and then we put in some word here, and that word is our variable name, and we can save information in those variables and use them later on in our code for various things. So in this case, we're going to create a variable called first name, and we're going to save into it the output from this prompt, which is going to be whatever we put into the input field. And we've got 2 of these, a first name and a last name. So as you can imagine here, what we're going to get is 2 boxes that pop up, one that asks for a first name and one that asks for a last name. And we'll go ahead and see that happen over here in our Chrome window. Daniel Wells. But that's all we get. There's no HTML in our code, so obviously there's nothing on the page here. So the next thing we're going to do is a little bit of processing, and with the processing we're going to reinforce the string concatenation that we talked about in the book. And string concatenation is basically just adding multiple strings together. A string is basically just some text. We'll talk more about strings next week when we're discussing variables. But we're basically going to take 3 different things. We're going to do and save it into full name. The first thing we're going to do is hello and a space. And then we're going to put a plus sign in there, which means I'm going to add another string to it. And then we're going to take whatever was entered into first name. So that first box, whatever got saved into first name, will be added to hello. And then I'm adding another space in there. And then I'm adding whatever was entered into last name. Now if we run this, I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're going to go back over to our window here. If I run this, it's going to do the exact same thing. And even though we have more code, we see nothing else here. And that's basically because, well, we have no output in our page. So we've done some input and we've done some processing. So in there's something new in this variable. We processed something new into this, and then we need some output. And for our output in this example, we're basically going to use a prompt again. And we're going to basically say alert, and we're going to pass in, or we're going to use not a prompt, excuse me, an alert, similar to we did in previous video. And we're going to put in the processing that we did into this alert. And when I save this and run this now, as you probably can imagine, we're going to get a 3rd box at the end with the prompt that pops up and says, hello, Daniel Wells. That's the stuff that we saved into the full name variable. So that's an example of input in JavaScript, processing in JavaScript, and output in JavaScript. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about doing these same concepts with HTML as well, because one of the downsides you notice, we ran this whole program and my page is still blank. That's not really exciting. It's a little anticlimactic. My whole program ran, and it's kind of, I guess you could say, bad practice, if you will. It's against industry standards to be using a lot of these prompts and alerts. You notice that when I do run them, the Chrome browser actually has this real ugly JavaScript up at the top, where they're not pretty. And you notice that the more I do them, JavaScript or Chrome starts to say, hey, these are dialogues. You probably don't like those. You want me to turn these off so that they don't happen. It's kind of frowned upon in today's world to use a lot of pop-up boxes with JavaScript. So I'm going to show in the next video how we can use our input and our output to be done in HTML, and try to avoid doing the JavaScript pop-ups, if you will, and do this a little more basically using the HTML that we learned last week. So we'll pick it up then.